It's Tuesday, July 29th, and a strong corridor of storms is going to hit the central and northern plains today. We do have a slight risk out here, specifically stretching from parts of western Iowa into most of Nebraska and even into parts of eastern Wyoming. Then an associated marginal risk, which spans a little bit further, even into parts of Montana, then even back into Lake Michigan around the Chicago area. Then we do have another marginal blotch right up here in parts of North Dakota as well. Now, today's storms are going to primarily be a wind threat. We do have a 15% chance of some severe winds out here in our slight risk area, where we could see some damaging gusts, possibly around 65 miles an hour. Then in this 5% risk, which spans our entire marginal risk area, there is going to be that conditional threat for 60-mile-an-hour gusts pretty much anywhere within this. Then our hail risk is going to be a bit more skewed towards our upper plains convergence zone, with a increased area of confidence around this 15% chance of some possibly large hail, even around 1 to 2 inches in diameter out here in parts of eastern Wyoming. And then with our 5% risk areas, there is just that conditional threat with some 1 inch in diameter hail. And then the Storm Prediction Center has actually not outlined a specific tornado risk area, but I do think if there were going to be a tornado today, it would be along an outflow boundary stretching from parts of Nebraska back into Iowa. And then yesterday we saw some record-breaking heat. It looks like we could see yesterday's records broken. Yeah, again, we're going to have an extremely hot day with some very warm, feels like temperatures over 110 and in the high 100s out here, specifically in the southeast, stretching all the way back into the Mississippi River Valley, then extending up into the Midwest. As we go further into the day, into the afternoon, this trend is going to shift a bit more west towards the Mississippi River Valley and Great Plains and Midwest, where we will likely still see a lot of high 100s feels like temperatures. And then as we move into the late afternoon to evening hours, we could still see an area overspreading the Midwest and parts of the Mississippi River Valley still in that high 100s feels like temperatures. And here's our risk of excessive rainfall. It looks like we're going to see a corridor of maximized rainfall, bringing a flooding threat to our main risk area today in parts of the Central Plains, and a slight risk area which stretches all the way from parts of the southeastern corner of Montana all the way back out to the northwestern corner of Missouri. We could see some widespread areas receiving 1 to 2 inches of rain and quite a few isolated areas receiving 3 to 4 inches of rain. And then back here in our slight risk area in parts of the desert southwest, specifically in New Mexico, we could see some widespread 1 to 2 inches of rain with some isolated 3 inches swaths as well. And then this would be enhanced by the mountainous terrain out here for that flooding threat. Then in our marginal risk, which spans a little bit further out in the Central Plains, Midwest, Northern Plains, and even back down into our Upper Plains convergence zone, and then back here in the southeast, there is just that conditional threat for a large area of 1 to 2 inches of rain today. And here's a look at what our storm evolution is going to do today. We can see that around midday, we're going to start to get signs of convection out here on our Upper Plains convergence zone. These storms would primarily hold that threat of some potentially large hail, but mostly damaging gusts in excess of 60 miles an hour. Then as we move forward, we actually could see a stronger complex develop along an area of some troughing up here in parts of southeastern South Dakota. This would also primarily bring that threat for potentially some damaging gusts over 60 miles an hour. Now, this would be closer to an outflow boundary left by yesterday's extremely strong line of storms. So there actually isn't going to be a zero tornado threat, although it's going to be very small. And then an area where we could see some larger hail and just stronger storms in general, bringing some larger severe gusts, would actually be anywhere north of the Colorado border, specifically up here in parts of northeastern and just generally eastern Wyoming. And then as we move a bit further into the day, we're actually going to see a pretty large complex of storms further evolve along the outflow boundary in parts of Nebraska, Iowa, along a front. And it looks like we actually could even have a low pressure system develop back in parts of western Iowa, where we could see a potentially maximized area of severe winds, potentially even reaching 65 to 70 miles an hour, and some smaller hail, because it would be mostly a linear system. And then along our outflow boundary, there's actually going to be an extremely unstable environment, which stretches all the way through Iowa out here. And we actually could see some damaging winds all the way up into Tuesday morning with this complex. And then there's also the conditional threat for a couple of storms developed behind our main complex of storms with some outflow. Now, these storms likely wouldn't last as long because the environment has already been spent up and it's night, so it won't really have the opportunity to recover, but potentially some small hail and damaging gusts with these as well. Now, here are 500 millibar winds, and we're going to notice a couple of things which are going to be instrumental for our storms today. We're going to see a first short wave pushing through up here in our upper plains convergence zone, specifically out here in Wyoming and even two parts of western Nebraska, which is going to help to initiate our storm clusters in this area. Then we also see quite a bit of flow aloft, even stretching back down into Iowa, which will allow for some convergence and possibly some storm initiation along these as well as we go further into the day. Then we also see that very large high pressure system back here in the Great Plains, which is actually going to pinch some of our flow, further enhancing it, and also is going to bring some organizing shear to our storms as well. And here's a general look at our environment out here in our main risk area today, which is probably going to be in parts of Nebraska and Iowa. We see a somewhat curved photograph with a pretty nice elongation out. We see some decent organizing shear, although our low-level shear and helicity isn't going to be super great. But as we go further to that outflow boundary, we actually could see these parameters improve, and that is why there's just that generally higher tornado threat along an outflow boundary, although it's going to be pretty small. We also see some veering in our winds, which could help with some storm organization. Some decent cape up here near our freezing level, and our mid-level lapse rates aren't going to be poor at all, around 7.4 Celsius decrease per kilometer. So coupled with our organizing shear, I do think there's the conditional threat for potentially some hail over 1 inch in diameter all the way up to 1.5 inches. We also see a higher lowest cloud level, which would mean higher base storms. But again, as we go closer to the outflow boundary, we could see these cloud bases lowered substantially. And then with that coupled with the better shear and helicity parameters, that is why there could be the potential tornado threat for a couple of week spin ups. We also see some drier aloft, which could potentially enhance the downdrafts and strength of our winds out here. But most importantly, we see a extremely moist environment at around a 70 dew point, then a extremely unstable environment at anywhere between 4 to 5,000 capes. So extremely favorable for some strong severe weather. Our precipitable water is going to be 1.68 inches, which could fuel that threat for some conditional flooding in the region of the Central Plains. And then we also have a downdraft cape of 1600. So coupled with that high precipitable water, we could see some strong damaging gusts out here, potentially anywhere between 65 to 70 miles an hour today. And here's a look at our environment in our upper plains convergence zone. We're going to see a very elongated photograph. Our shear is going to be pretty terrible, which is actually going to be the reason why that tornado threat is not going to be good at all. But our organizing shear is going to be extremely favorable for some big updrafts with these storms and that potential for some large hail. Now, the main thing that would hinder that is a bit of a capping inversion around the 2 kilometer level. Now, that is why there is that mostly conditional threat for these storms, because we can't really tell how strong they'll be and if they'll be able to overcome this capping inversion. So that would be the main hindrance for these storms, although damaging gust and potentially some large hail still looks possible. But most importantly, we see a moist environment, 62 dew point, coupled with a pretty unstable environment actually at around 3,500 cape. So just favorable for severe weather in general. And then we're going to have some organized storms because of that bulk shear. And then because we have quite a bit of cape, decent mid-level lapse rates around 8.8 Celsius decreasing per kilometer, there is going to be that conditional threat for some large hail, potentially even all the way up to 2 inches in diameter, although I see anywhere between 1 to 1.5 inches in diameter being more likely. Then lastly, we do see a bit of a pretty high low-level lapse rate, which could increase that threat for some damaging winds as well.